Day 184 to 8:21 a.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. Another 10 days passed. It was already the third week since the world changed. The feeling of urgency was now in the air. Even if no one can see the barrier, the people somehow feel that the peaceful time was already running out. Fortunately, the renovations of the base were going smoothly. The outer wall already had its foundations built around the entire location, while Lewis finished building the northern and northeastern areas of the walls. The start of the construction of the walls was slower than expected. However, as Lewis became familiar with the process, the speed started to accelerate. At the current pace, the construction should finish several days before the barrier vanish. Both Chemetris and Ilya sure adapted fast to their new surroundings. Their interactions with others were limited, especially Chemetris. It has not been long since he broke out of his seal. There was a wide cultural gap between humans in the past and now. In the first place, a powerful being did not have that many chances to interact with humans. It was like this even in the past. On the other hand, Ilya had better interactions with the residents. It seemed that disguising as a human and living with them benefited her in this regard. Ilya became another headache to Mark, however. She was a succubus and was bound to get attention from men. Furthermore, the succubus were naturally coquettish in their mannerisms. Thus, she was prone to making misunderstandings. There was already someone else that caused this problem in the past. It was Kate. She was one of the mutators they brought back only their journey home from Bay City. Now, everyone knew that it was her usual mannerisms and the misunderstandings subsided. She even became one of the crucial people in the base because of her ability to see using temperatures. Her thermal sight was the bane of invisible and camouflaged enemies. For now, there were two confirmed succubus in the base. The first one was the former ninth queen in the kingdom of Black Duendes, Ulvela. However, as Ulvela was focused on training Veer inside the laboratory, she never caused such trouble as Kate and Ilya. And there was one unexpected thing that happened when Ulvela met Ilya. Ulvela was utterly shocked. The succubus were also demons, and they did measure hierarchy depending on the purity of their blood. Ulvela might be someone high-ranking among their race, but she was not a pureblood succubus. In fact, pureblood succubus had gone extinct a long time ago. The succubus and incubus come in pairs, having the very same origin. A child born from a pair would become either a succubus or incubus depending on their gender. However, because of their nature, it was extremely common for them to choose another race as a partner. Because of that, as time passed, the number of pureblood succubus, and even the pureblood incubus, decreased further and further. There was also an event that caused the death of the remaining ones, especially the leaders of the race. And that was the cause of shock that Ulvela had. Ilya was a pureblood succubus. It was not surprising since Ilya was a succubus from way back 5,000 years ago. It also explained why Ilya had way more beauty and appeal compared to Ulvela. The problems aside, Mark's golem research gained a large leap because of the arrival of Ilya and Chemetris. It seemed that the creator did not only dabble in creating chimeras and alchemy. He also had his hands on Golem C, which were applied in creating his laboratory and the floating vessel. It seemed that the creator also created giant golems to guard his laboratory. Unfortunately, those golems had already sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Fortunately, scientists, even the mad ones, valued their research more than their lives. Thus, the consciousness of the creator kept the research records and put them inside the floating vessel. Those research documents contained processes of creating chimeras, making alchemical concoctions, and many other things. However, Mark only had an interest in one thing: the research about making golems. Mark had quite a problem reading it since it was written in a lost ancient language, but Ilya happily translated the contents of the documents for him. What made Mark really happy was the detailed explanations of magic circuits and the correct methods to create them. Furthermore, Compared to the research of the creator, the documents that Mark's group got from the Black Duendes were rubbish and were even outdated. It seemed that the creator made huge modifications on the magic circuits, not only improving the functions but also the efficiency of the circuits. The past few days of Mark was spent making parts for the golems he intended to make. It was unfortunate that while they now knew how to make the magical energy conductors used to make the magic circuits, they still lacked the materials. As such, Mark could only stick to his previous plans. In another day or two, the first golem, crafted by Mark's own hands, would see the light of day. Day 174 to 12:21 p.m. Bay City Military Settlement, Pasay City, Metro Manila. In the largest military settlement in the Philippines, things were not going well. Bay City was chosen as an evacuation site because it was a reclaimed area surrounded by water. But that fact itself turned out to be the worst setting during the world's change. The earthquake caused a moderate-sized water surge, swallowing the western areas of the settlement. If not for the fact that new land appeared out of nowhere and spread out to the sea, that water surge could become a tidal wave that would kill the whole settlement. However, the earthquake alone already caused a severe catastrophe that swallowed the entire settlement. The tall buildings collapsed, causing deaths in the upper areas of the settlement. Who would have thought that the upper area where the privileged lived would become the deadliest area, and the tent city became the safest in that catastrophe? The population of the entire settlement reduced by half all of a sudden. Most of the deaths were caused by the collapsing buildings from the upper areas. Many of the buildings were either office and condominium buildings that were converted to dwellings. The residents were buried under the rubble. Only the powerful managed to survive the collapse. But that was not the worst problem they had after the world changed. As new land appeared out of thin air, the ditches that became the settlement's natural barrier were filled. Now, the entire settlement was connected to the mainland. In the past 2 weeks, the remaining forces of Bay City had been continuously fighting hordes upon hordes of infected. The wreckage of the buildings became a hindrance to the infected, but it was not enough to stop them from coming. As for the original walls that the settlement had, all of those already turned into useless debris. The military managed to set up a new wall, albeit shorter and not as sturdy as their previous one. It was made with the remaining resources and scraps they gathered from the remains of the settlement. It also only covered a smaller area of the settlement, mainly the remains of Mall of Asia, where their resources were stored before. Although the mall already collapsed into ruins, there were still salvageable food supplies under its rubble. Now, the entirety of the Bay City military settlement only circulated around the compounds of the destroyed mall. Swarmed by the infected, day and night, the whole settlement was moving slowly to its end. It was not only the Bay City. Almost every single settlement on Earth turned into a pile of ruins. Settlements built in the middle of the ocean, islands and such, were swallowed by tidal waves. Those that were built in the middle of cities became piles of rubble. The death toll rose, and the population of the entire Earth drastically reduced even more. Without any defenses left, the Mechids could wipe the remains of these settlements. Fortunately, the barrier protected them from such alien threats. However, the invisible barrier might have protected them from the radiation and the threat that the Mechids brought, but that barrier did not protect the remaining humans against the infected. Without the defenses they built before, the people could only make do with what they had remaining. They tried to fight back, doing the best that they could. Even so, more settlements fell as time went by. Some got wiped out, but more decided to abandon the settlements they tried to protect with their lives in line before. A ruined settlement was no different than living in a decrepit house in the middle of the apocalypse. Those that were capable took up the decision and chose to gamble. Leaving the settlements was not an easy decision. In the past few months since the apocalypse started, these places served as the new home for everyone. Abandoning their homes, even if it was already destroyed, was still a hard decision. Besides, leaving the settlements did not also guarantee any safety to anyone. It was all up to chance, and it was a gamble that only the capable could take. As for the weak people, their survival was the hardest to foresee. Whether it be staying or abandoning the settlement, their chances of survival were very low. Unfortunately, those that decided to leave could only hold out inside their ruined settlements for now. The environment outside was still filled with radiation. The survivors learned it the hard way. They did not know when the radiation would dissipate, but they could only wait. All because staying in their settlements for the rest of their lives was not plausible anymore. Still, day by day, the remaining population of humans on Earth was decreasing. It was not only the humans that were struggling now, however. With the spirit dimension now merged with the mortal dimension, the remaining magical races were facing a much worse situation. Their tribes, families, and friends all appeared in the new world without warning. They had no barrier to protect them or even a wall that they could rely on. The magical races were just thrown into the new world without any protection. Although the radiation would not affect them as much as humans, they were vulnerable to many other threats that infested the new Earth. That was why some desperate tribes decided to do something that they never thought that they would do. It was to cooperate with humans for survival. That was a gamble that the magical races decided to take. There was no guarantee that humans would accept them or their cooperation. It would not be surprising if they were seen as a threat and could be killed on the spot. But they had no choice. Same as the humans. Day 184 AA. In the dimension that oversaw the entire Earth, the cloaked figure could only sigh as she watched the planet's current situation. However, she, herself, was helpless in this situation. Bound by the rules of Earth and the God Creator, what she could do was limited. Now, her only hope that humanity would be preserved was the very same people that they decided to restrict in the past. The people who were beyond humanity. In fact, despite the disaster and the majority of the world suffering, there were some places that were doing well. And it was the places where the chosen people by the eyes controlled. It might have been better if the remaining humans just go under the command of these people. However, humans were born arrogant, not wanting to succumb to anyone's rule. It would not be easy to unite them under someone's wing, not to mention that the chosen people also had their own quirks and personalities. The observer made another sigh. I do not want this planet to end under my jurisdiction, she said under her distressed breath. Day 185 to 3:21 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. It had been peaceful for quite a while. No attacks from evolved animals, no appearance of mechas, and most of all, no infected had ever been seen around the base for a long time. The location of the mountain base was surely hard to reach. It was in the middle of the mountains, after all. Dangers was also in every corner. But with enough preparations, supplies, and personnel, it was one of the better locations to settle in during the apocalypse. Of course, it was not the best. It was only because of the abilities of those that settled in this place. Or else, it might have been wiped out with the arrival of mechas from space. If not, the dimensions fused together could have caused its destruction. Very much most of the remaining settlements in the world. Although at this time, the peace that the mountain base had for a while was finally disturbed. Quick! Inform Master. One of the Tikbalangs cried out as a presence suddenly entered their illusion magic around the base. Usually, the Tikbalangs would not panic upon detecting the presence of an intruder. After all, the illusion magic they cast around the base would cause intruders to be lost inside the forest that it covered. However, not every single creature could be caught by the illusion. For example, the mechas. The illusion magic of the Tikbalangs directly affect the minds of the victims, fogging their eyes and distorting their sense of direction. However, the mechas did not have an organic brain that the illusion magic could affect. But it was not only mechas who were unaffected to the illusion magic. There were others. One kind of those unaffected creatures was, of course, people of the same race as the user of the illusion magic. Clang, 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 clang. The sound of alarm sounded from the eastern area of the base. And as rehearsed, the workers immediately made their way back inside the inner walls. However, the intruders this time were not just some infected. Ah! One of the workers screamed as he saw several humanoid figures rushing towards him. With the upper bodies of a human, horse heads, and lower bodies, the intruders were definitely tikbalangs, infected tikabalangs, indicated by the open flesh wounds all over their bodies. Infected they might be, they were still among the infamous race when they were still alive. All of these infected tikbalangs still ran too fast. Regular people, and even most mutators, had no way of outrunning the group. Even if the alarms were sounded early and the workers immediately retreated, it was not enough. The infected tikbalangs already caught up to the workers lagging behind. Of course, the workers could not help but feel afraid. Even though they experienced fighting the infected while gathering supplies in Pennsylvania, none of them moved as fast as the infected tikbalangs. All the workers could see was the vague shape of the intruders because of their speed. Rumble. Suddenly, the ground shook. A wall rock rose from the soil, blocking the way of the leading infected tikbalangs. Bam! 3 of the intruders slammed onto the walls. Living tikbalangs would not make this kind of mistake. They were used to their unparalleled speed and would not have any problem avoiding the wall. The brainless infected, however, could not. As they slammed onto the wall, the force caused the 3 multiple injuries, even disfiguring their horse heads. But it was not enough to kill them. Furthermore, there were more than just 3. Quick! Retreat! Lewis shouted towards the workers as he created more walls of stone to block the enemies. Luckily, he was working on the walls on the northeast side of the base. He managed to quickly respond to the threat. With Lewis present, however, the infected tikbalangs shifted their target to him. It was no news that the infected were more attracted to beings with magical energy. Still, it was the better scenario. Most of the workers had no way of defending themselves against these extremely fast enemies. Lewis could at least slow them down, even if his speed also had no match against them. Whoosh! A shadow moved past Lewis, rushing towards the closest infected tikbalang. Slash! The shadow swiped her hand, her long claws slashed towards the neck of the enemy. Nay. Unfortunately, unlike those of humans, the neck of tikbalangs was much larger. The infected tikbalang, with its wounded throat, tried to attack the shadow with a loud neigh. It moved its head, trying to use its long neck as a blunt weapon, splattering its blood around it. Tisk! The shadow retreated immediately, clicking her tongue in annoyance. Her identity was no one else but Felicia, the feline mutator with a pitiful past. She was currently in her cat form, giving her enough speed to match the infected tikbalangs. Bam! Felicia, are you okay? Lewis shouted as he hurled a basketball-sized stone towards the infected tikbalang that attacked Felicia. Using its head as a weapon while heavily wounded caused the infected tikbalang to stagger. The stone smashed onto the head of its target. The infected tikbalang's head exploded from the impact. Its headless body fell to the ground. But the battle was not over yet. I'm fine. Felicia shouted as she retreated. I'm just surprised my claws weren't able to cut off its head. You two should concentrate on fighting first. A voice entered the ears of the two as another shadow joined them. Roan! Felicia exclaimed as she saw her older brother arrived. Don't space out! Roan shouted. The intruders are fast. Roan shouted since the remaining infected tikbalangs already managed to go around the walls that Lewis made. Lewis immediately retreated to the back while Felicia and Roan took the front. They were showing good coordination and understanding of each other's abilities. Slash! Roan rushed forward to lead the battle. Unexpectedly, unlike Felicia, his claw swiped through the thick neck of his target. This was the difference in the strength of the two, considering that Roan was a level 3 mutator. Damn it! Their necks are tough. Roan exclaimed as he avoided an incoming attack. While he did manage to kill one in one swipe of his claws, it seemed that he had to exert a good amount of strength to do so. By the looks of the situation, Felicia's attack before did not work, not only because the necks of the infected Tikbalangs were thick, but their bodies were also toughened when they turned. As for Felicia, since attacking the neck did not work for her, she changed her attack method. Instead of beheading the enemies, she aimed to pierce their heads. It was more dangerous, however, as she had to attack a specific spot. It was far different than aiming for the more obvious parts of the enemy's body. Around Lewis, several pointed stones floated. Unfortunately, attacking the fast-moving, infected Tikbalangs by hurling stones was hard. Lewis had no way of aiming for the heads, and most of his attacks were missing. Even so, the attacks from Lewis served as a good distraction for the enemies. It allowed Roan and Felicia have more openings to attack. Above the east side of the inner walls, several people were watching the situation. "You have good people here," Chemetris spoke to Mark, who stood beside him. "They have good coordination." "I know. I handpicked them," Mark replied. "But just the three of them won't be enough." That was true. The three managed to kill a few already, but it was quite a sizable horde of infected Tikbalangs. How many were there? With 5 dead, there were still 22 remaining, trying to attack the 3 people. And there, from the forest, a few more were coming, shambling with their heavily injured bodies. "We should move already," Mark suggested as he was about to jump off the wall. "Wait." Chemetris stopped Mark, making him look back. "Leave this to me." "You sure?" Mark asked. "No problems." Chemetris nodded. "I know that the people here have accepted us to some extent, but I want to show my worth." "If you say so." Mark agreed. And there, Chemetris took off his shirt, revealing his heavily sculpted body. His wings then spread out, surprising the people around, aside from Mark and May, who had seen it before. Soaring fast from the walls, Chemetris landed in front of the trio, surprising them. "Ha!" Ilya sighed. "I already told Master that he doesn't need to prove himself to humans. Yet, he still did it. It might not seem necessary to you, but it's a must for him since he's not a socialite like you. He needs something as a leverage people to treat him that he belongs with them." Mark replied. Ilya fell silent. Maybe it was something she overlooked even though she had nothing but Chemetris in her eyes. In the middle of the battle. "Who?" Roan exclaimed as someone landed in front of them without warning. Those wings were not familiar to them, after all. "It's me." Chemetris turned his head. "Watch out!" Lewis shouted. The moment Chemetris turned to Roan, a pair of the infected Tikbalangs was already in front of him to attack. But to their surprise, without even looking, Chemetris grabbed the necks of the 2 attackers. The 2 flailed as they lost the mobility of their heads. Their hands and nails hit the arms of Chemetris, while their wild kicking hit Chemetris's body. Being a half-horse, a Tikbalang's kick was not something that just anyone could receive. It had twice the force of a kick from a real horse or more. Yet, to everyone's surprise, Chemetris did not even flinch from the kick. There was not even a scratch from the hooves of the infected Tikbalangs. "I'll handle this," Chemetris said. And before the 3 could respond, a strong gust of wind was felt around Chemetris. Then, the 2 infected Tikbalangs in the hands of Chemetris were beheaded with an invisible force. Chemetris then threw the 2 heads away as their bloody bodies plopped to the ground. At the same time, the remaining enemies were already on the move to attack the new target. Compared to Lewis, Chemetris was exuding more magical energy, not to mention that he was closer than the other. But then, Chemetris waved his hands. Everyone watching was shocked at the scene that unfolded before them. A surge of unseen energy was felt by everyone together with a breeze of wind that brushed through their faces. And there, all the infected Tikbalangs, even those that were still behind the stone walls that Lewis created, stopped on their tracks. A line of blood appeared on their necks before each head started to slide off their necks. Almost at the same time, all the infected tikbalangs fell down with their heads detached from their bodies. Unexpectedly, even the stone walls that stood before some of the enemies were bisected. Everyone stared at the scene. The battle just ended like that. None of them even knew what happened. The only ones that knew were Mark, May, Ilya, and the sylphs in the base. His windblades is stronger than before, Mark said to Ilya. Back when Mark fought Chemetris in New Jersey, those windblades were far smaller. But now, it covered an entire area. Master already recovered his abilities, Ilya replied proudly. Master's state back then was nothing compared to now. Mark could only nod. In fact, Mark also sensed this already. If he and Chemetris fought now, there was a huge chance that he would lose. But then, Ilya suddenly whispered. Master already recovered, but he said before that he had no confidence in beating you. You also improved drastically during the time we haven't seen you. But by the looks of it, you're not aware, huh? Mark could only look at Ilya. Was he mistaken about his current abilities? In any case, the sudden threat to the base was already dealt with, and Chemetris had proven his strength to everyone. It was hitting two birds with one stone. Still, it also proved that the defenses of the base were still lacking, and there were many unexpected dangers that they could come across. This time, it was lucky that Louis and Felicia were nearby, or there would be casualties among the workers. And lastly, everyone learned that the magical infected were more dangerous than they thought, especially when they were in large groups. Day 189 to 4:23 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. The last days of the barrier were already coming. It was already a month since the world changed. While it would not be surprising that the barrier just vanished without warning as it had been waning for a few days now, it was still holding on. It might be that the observer and the eyes tried to make a few days leeway. This thought was just speculation, however. Fourth or any other eyes never made an appearance since the day the world changed to confirm it. As far as everyone in the base was concerned, they were now ready to face the upcoming events. Yesterday, Louis and the workers finished building the outer walls. Everyone cheered as they watched the finishing touches of the walls, more than doubling the safety of the entire base. As it had been expected, Louis and the workers worked more efficiently as they got used to building the walls, and it was finished even faster than expected. With the outer walls finished, it could be seen that the residents of the base had more confidence in surviving this dying world. Aside from the walls, there was another good event that happened. The amount of radiation outside the barrier was practically gone. Even regular people could go outside without experiencing the side effects of radiation. It showed that even if the barrier had yet to vanish, people could already travel outside. Of course, that was if they could wave through the dangers that they would need to face upon leaving the barrier. In fact, there were signs of radiation in the air thinning. There were more and more instances that animals were seen near the vicinity of the mountain base. Furthermore, not all the animals that were seen were mutated. Some were animals that had never been seen on Earth, or at least, in the mortal dimension. It was a mystery where these animals went during the time the radiation was high. However, it was a bit nice to see non-hostile creatures wandering the mountains. And today, another good thing happened. Done. Inside the subdimension of the Night-Evered Spirit Tree, Mark's voice echoed loudly. After about 3 weeks of research, trial, and error, Mark's efforts finally bore fruit. At the side, both Annika and Barak also watched in anticipation. Even Ilya and Chemetris were present, considering that they were more familiar with actual golems than everyone else present. And to say, the two were both amazed at the current situation. In the Lost Era, creating golems was not something that could be done in a few weeks. It was even more impossible if one started from scratch. Yet, Mark achieved something that the people of the past were never able to. Yes, Mark relied on the research started by the Black Duendes and the creator and used the broken golem and the floating vessel as a basis. However, even with that, Mark's current achievement was still outstanding. Mark stood in front of his first creation. Following his tastes as an otaku, the golem had a rather unique design. It was a humanoid, less than 5 feet in height, with a rather feminine shape. Yes, it was a female golem. In fact, Mark did not hesitate to make it look human. He even used the skin-like, blood metal, from Miracle to make the skin of the golem. If one did not know, they would think that what stood in front of Mark was a human. Well, if they looked from afar. If one was to look closely, the clothing of the golem was a part of its body, although detachable. Furthermore, the clothes were made of different kinds of blood metal, stitched together. Annika. One last check before we activate it. Mark called Annika as they began the final check of the circuits inside the golem. Stretching his hand towards the back of the golem, Mark released his magical energy into its circuits. At the side, Annika observed the flow of magical energy inside the golem. It's all good. Everything is flowing perfectly, Annika exclaimed, making Mark remove his hand. Then, it's the last step, Mark said as he held out an orb in his hand. He then walked towards the front of the golem. I still can't believe that you had a working golem core. 3 at that. Even the creator only had 5 of those, which he had to sacrifice many of his creations to obtain. All of them were broken now, though. Alia spoke, to which Chemetric agreed. Mark was not paying attention to Ilya, however. He was focused on the final step of bringing this golem to life. The golem core in Mark's hand was, of course, one of the gifts they received from Bathala. Specifically, this one was the golem core that Iola received. That was Mark's goal for making a female humanoid golem. Since he was making golems for his 3 daughters, he asked them what they preferred to have. Both Miracle and Abigail gave their requests. The 2 little girls wanted something similar to pets. However, Iola did not seem to have any preferences. Just like Keeper, she was not choosy and was fine with anything given to her. And since that was the case, Mark made something that Iola would definitely need. With those thoughts, Mark pressed a button on the center of the golem's chest. It opened the chest of the golem, revealing a spherical indent surrounded by several circles of mechanisms with different, magic circles carved onto them. The mechanisms then separated, opening enough space where the golem core could fit into. Mark then put the golem core into the space. It began to glow brightly as the mechanisms began to close. Then, the glow from the core slowly spread to the magic circuits. Taking his hand away from the chest of the golem, everyone watched it close. Like the tests, Annika observed the flow of magical energy across the golem's body. And like the few tests before, she did not see anything going wrong. And under everyone's anticipation, the lowered head of the golem began to move up. The golem then slowly opened her eyes, revealing her crystal eyes. With Mark standing in front of her, he was the first person that the golem saw. Of course, it was not something that mattered. As the maker of the golem, he was already registered inside of its database. Yes, database. As magical as it might be, the golem cores from Bathala were made with user-friendly mechanisms. A regular golem core from the Lost Era was rather hard to use. A golem builder back then needed to imprint their will into the core using magic circles, which were then stored inside the core. The core then served a database, executing those will as commands, making full use of every magic circles connected to the core. The golem stared at Mark, recognizing him as her creator. And as Mark programmed the core, the golem lowered her head, acknowledging his presence. Wow! Annika exclaimed happily. She moved. Not only Annika, Barak, Ilya, and Chemetrice were glad to see the first movements of the golem. And here, Mark executed the command that would mark the birth of the golem. Your name is Brynhildr, Mark spoke. Alias, Hild. As Mark executed the command, the crystal eyes of Brynhildr glowed. She then nodded in acknowledgement, recording her name and alias into her database. She can't talk, can she? Annika asked, stepping beside Mark. In response, Brynhildr stared at the unfamiliar presence in front of her. Yes, presence. The golems would not recognize only the appearance of a creature in front of them. They also record the creature's magical energy and, for Brynhildr, even their mental fluctuation. This way, even if the person in front of them looked the same as their master, they would not follow their orders. It was a way to prevent golems from accepting orders from other beings aside from their maker and master. It was a locking mechanism that was also present in golems in the past. After all, many creatures were capable of shapeshifting. One could shapeshift and take control of their golems if this mechanism was not created. At least, for crafted golems. Summoned and natural golems did not need such function since they only responded to the owner of magical energy that created them. She can't talk. Mark shook his head. The core can probably handle that function, but none of the magic circuits and the magic symbols in the documents and the broken golem had that function. It would have been awesome if Mark managed to create a golem capable of speech. It would make Brynhildr look more human. Still, the current creation was not bad at all. This is really different from the golems we saw before, Chmetrice spoke, observing Brynhildr closely. The golems in our time are bulky and rough looking. Even their movements were slow and gruff. This is the first time I saw a golem this intricate. Not to mention, small. It's not surprising. Really, Mark replied. Talking about your time, golems are probably treated as nothing but destructive weapons. They were used either to guard something or attack something. They don't need to be intricate since their purposes are simple, and they are bound to be destroyed and repaired sooner or later. That's true. Chmetrice nodded. Even their creator did the same thing, although he made the golems as sturdy and as strong as possible. In any case, they saw how Mark made this golem piece by piece. Compared to the Lost Era, the parts that Mark made looked advanced and incomparable to the past. Those small but complex parts made the difference. Since in the past, those kinds of mortal technologies did not exist. While Mark and the others were talking, Brynhildr was looking around, following the voices that entered her ear. She seemed to have been recording the appearance and presence of the people around her creator. Well then, now that she activated without problems, I should start some more testing. Mark said. Hild. Mark then called out to his creation. Take several steps forward. As Brynhild heard the command, she immediately followed. Since it was her first activation, it seemed that her core was still calibrating the functions of her body. It took a few seconds. Finally, Brynhildr moved her right leg. It was slow. She looked like a human trying to get used to her body as she took her first steps. The right leg then was lifted and landed forward. Brynhildr's body then followed the momentum. Then, the next was the left leg. At first, her momentum and movements were slow. But as she took more steps, her movements became faster, comparable to a human of her size. It was a bit stiff, considering that her insides were made of metal. Nonetheless, it was far better than what a modern robot could do. Stop, Mark commanded after he saw the results of the first test. Move backward back to your initial position. Then walk in circles. Twice both towards left and right. Mark gave the commands as he began testing the results of his work. Everyone also watched in anticipation. Something amazing was born in this place. It might still be in the testing phase and still far from the final product. But the fact that it was moving and responding to orders was a big step all in all. Furthermore, this was not the last that Mark would make. There were still 2 golems in line to build. The parts and circuits were already made. The only thing left was to piece up everything together. Although only Mark knew of what the other 2 would be, the other still anticipated the outcome of his work. Furthermore, it might not look like it, but Brynhildr was not just some humanoid golem. She had a far more complex function that would address one of Iola's weaknesses. The testing of that function would come later, however. Day 192 to 3:32 p.m. Night Evered Spirit Tree Subdimension, Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. 2 days after the birth of Brynhildr, Mark finished assembling the other 2 golems. While building the remaining two, Mark also tested the capabilities of Brynhildr by making her his assistant. And to say, even Ilya and Chemetris were surprised by the results. It seemed that the 3 golem cores the girls received from Bathala were not just regular ones. Brynhildr was capable of learning things and not just follow what Mark programmed in her core beforehand. Unfortunately, she was not some extremely intelligent being. While it was considered learning, it was more or less just the process of memorization. As a test, Mark made Brynhildr learn a few commands that he did not program in her core. At first, Mark showed her how to perform the commands. Afterward, she was capable of doing it on her own. However, there were limitations. As a creation incapable of free will, Brynhildr could not perform what she learned on her own. Well, unless a command was given beforehand, she would respond depending on the condition given. Furthermore, Brynhildr was unreliable in following intricate and complex orders. It was not surprising, considering she was a model of golem that was not made for creating things. In any case, the fact that Brynhildr could learn was already a huge thing for a golem. All of the crafted golems that both Ilya and Chemetris had seen before were incapable of that. On the other hand, summoned golems seemed to be an exception. These kinds of golems were practically living beings. They might be dumb, incredibly dumb, but they were capable of learning on their own. After piecing up the 2 remaining golems, it was now time to activate the 2. Now, what stood in front of Mark were 2, rather uncanny, golems. One was a rabbit, about a meter tall. It was large enough to let a 3-year-old child ride its back. There was no need to think. This golem was for Miracle. Both Abigail and Miracle requested pet-like golems. In particular, Miracle had quite an interest in rabbit-like creatures. When a rabbit-like creature appeared in an anime they were watching from time to time, her attention was pasted on the monitor. It was the reason Mark built this one. Furthermore, Mark also used the pelt and skin of animals they hunted before to make the rabbit golem. While it looked a bit strange, not only its size, but it had features that did not belong to rabbits. For example, horns. It did not look anything else but a mutated animal. On the other hand, the next golem was a canine-feline hybrid. It looked a lot like a domestic dog, a Shiba Inu, to be exact. However, it had the claws of a cat as its primary attack method. It was also made with agility in mind. It was also it could catch up with Abigail's speed even a little. Of course, aside from its appearance, these golems had other functions. After all, while Mark took the request of the little girls, he aimed for their safety with the help of these golems. The last thing to do was put the cores of the new golems and test their bodies for adjustment. In fact, even Brynhildr needed some parts to adjust. There was some uncanny stiffness in her arms, and Mark wanted to make her arms a bit more flexible because of her second function. Not only Mark but the other 4 people were waiting for the 2 golems to move. But as Mark held the 2 cores, he froze. We should get out. It was not only Mark. Chemetris also sensed what Mark felt and spoke. The other 3 were confused. They were, after all, in the middle of an exciting event. But then, for Mark and Chemetris to react oddly, something might be happening outside. Even the orb of light, the consciousness of the night-evered spirit tree, appeared and circled around Mark, conveying its panic. As Chemetris suggested, the 5 of them went out of the subspace as fast as they could. The moment they went out, what they saw was the people staring in the sky. Gerger, the barrier. May was also outside, seemingly just arrived to call Mark. I felt it too, Mark replied as they moved to a location that they could see the sky. Regular people could not see the barrier. Those that had magical energy could sense it. This time, however, everyone could see the barrier. It looked as if a gigantic cellophane sheet covered the base like a bowl. What in the world is going on? Jaya exclaimed as she joined Mark's group. Bro, do you know? Jaya asked Mark, who was observing the sky silently. The barrier is vanishing. Mark replied. Like electronic gadgets, Sometimes these items show malfunctions at the end of their lifespan. In theory, the scene that was happening at the moment was the same. The barrier was exerting the last of its energy, causing the distortions at its final moments. And as expected, the cellophane-like scene began to blur even more. Slowly, under everyone's eyes, the odd scene in the sky vanished. At the same time, the feeling of safety that everyone had reduced. No one could understand why they were feeling nervous that the scene in the sky vanished. They should have calmed down since it was gone, but they were feeling the opposite instead. Boss. Huey approached Mark, unable to voice out what he had in mind. Mark, on the other hand, took a deep breath. Unlike before, the air felt uncomfortable. Tell everyone to stay alert, Mark spoke. The protection the eyes gave us ended. The days from now on won't be as safe as yesterday. Yes, boss. Huey nodded. Day 192 to 7 p.m. Recreation Area, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. It was time for dinner in the base. But now, everyone was gathered in the recreation area for an emergency meeting. Currently, everyone's attention was on Huey and Odalina, who were both Mark's left and right hands in the base. There was nothing much to brief everyone. Nonetheless, knowing that the leeway humans had ended and the real threats of the new world would be felt was more than enough to make everyone a bit nervous. It was the natural reaction. No one knew what would happen from now on. And the unknown was what humans feared since the olden days. In the least, the preparations that everyone gave their efforts in gave them the confidence to survive. Still, no one could forget the feeling they had when the barriers finished. The feeling that no one was protecting them anymore, despite not actually knowing what was going on at first. Mark, on the other hand, was just keeping his silence on that phenomenon. Nonetheless, he had a vague idea. The magical abilities of the eyes originated from the emotions of humans. As such, it was the same power that made those barriers. When the barrier vanished as it drained the last of its energy, the emotions from the energy were released. Those fluctuations were what everyone felt. In the first place, humans could not handle a heavy concentration of different emotions at the same time. Those that felt as such would feel paranoid and threatened, not knowing how to handle such. Watching the people gathered in front of him, Mark sighed. Looks like it begins here. Mark murmured. Even Mark was unsure of what would happen from now on. Surely, the base was safe due to the layers of defenses that it had. But like the other day, a group of infected tikbalangs managed to get near the base. If not for Felicia and Louis present at that time, there might be some deaths among the workers.
Unexpected things could happen at any time. No matter how prepared a person was, it was not sure that they prepared for every event that could happen. While those thoughts lingered in his mind, Mark felt someone hold his right hand. The soft sensation made him give another sigh as he looked to his right. May was looking at him, nodding slightly. There was no need to say some cheesy dialogue like, "You are not alone," or, "We're here, everything will be fine." Just her clear eyes made Mark stop thinking about negative things. Look towards the future and charge through all the walls. After all, none of them wanted to lose what they had at this moment. Mark shook his head. He might have become an evolver, a mutator, and a blood demon. His demeanor had undergone drastic changes. Nonetheless, he was still the same old depressive Mark, who did not even know how to face the future. Unfortunately, while the mountain base was just doing a meeting, the other human settlements on Earth were facing a huge dilemma. With the barriers gone, the Mechids could now attack them. In most places, the Mechids might not be many. However, not all the settlements had the firepower to fight against these high-tech invaders from space. Most of the Mechids were impervious to smaller firearms, while those that were easier to kill could shoot lasers from a distance. In the worst, it was the combination of the two. In just a few hours after the barriers vanished, hundreds of small and medium-sized settlements were either destroyed or abandoned. Those that managed to salvage their vehicles or those that were capable of running fled their settlements. Those who were weak fell prey to the metal blades and laser weapons of the mechanical menace. The scenes that happened in the first few days of the apocalypse were renewed in everyone's minds. The fear, the helplessness, the regrets, the pain. Everyone was questioning the heavens. Why was this happening to them? Unfortunately, those questions would remain unanswered as only a few would be given the answers. Their cries of agony that echoed towards the night sky would vanish along with the wind. All that was left were their lifeless bodies, eyes wide open, and the expressions before their death frozen on their faces. However, the current fight was not only for humans. Magical races had already been fighting the infected and the Mechans long before the barriers for the humans vanished. Some of the good-natured tribes provided shelter for the humans they decided to save. Now was not the time for the magical races to deal with their prejudice against humans. Both were in the same boat, fighting the infected and the Mechans. With the help of the magical races, many human groups managed to survive the collapse of their settlements and bases. Now, most of the living humans learned a lesson. The most dangerous places on Earth at the moment were where the human cities were before. Those cities were not only infested by the infected. At this moment, for some reason unknown, there were more activities of Mechans in such locations. Thus, many human groups were forced to take a gamble. Fleeing their settlements and bases near cities, they traveled through forests and up the mountains. Surely, they would encounter evolved animals and mutated animals along the way, but it was not as bad as the current situations within the ruins of the cities. In the dimension that oversaw Earth, the hooded figure let out a sigh. She turned towards her back. 26 figures stood waiting for her orders. The 1 month we gave humans had ended. The observer spoke. This event will mark the start of human extinction if it was left alone. The observer panned her eyes to the 26 figures. Go forth, my apostles. Guide your chosen people. It is still not the time for Earth to end, so is humanity. Those words echoed into the ears of the 26 figures as they vanished from the white world that they were in. Day 193 to 12:15 p.m. Night Everard Spirit Tree Subdimension, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. It was early lunchtime, but Mark was inside the Chios subdimension with Brynhilder. Yesterday, the activation of the 2 remaining golems was delayed due to the barrier reaching the end of its protection. Now, Mark was watching the 2 new golems move around and test their capabilities. Like Brynhilder, he gave the 2 animal golems names and alias. The giant rabbit was given the name Anaba and alias Naba, while the canine feline golem was given the name Kaval and the alias Val. The naming pattern of the 3 golems was quite clear. It might sound unnecessary at first, giving them aliases. However, it was something that Mark thought to be important. Crafted golems were not autonomous in most cases. In order for them to move, they needed to receive an order from either their creator or master. However, there could be situations that their longer names could be a hindrance. For example, emergencies. Even just a syllable short with their names could save time and be a huge thing to influence the situation because the golems moved a millisecond earlier. As the 2 animal golems moved around, Mark closely observed their movements. Their legs, necks, joints, and even their tails. He stared at every part scrupulously. While the magic circuits might be functioning correctly, it did not mean that the body parts were the same. For example, a small nick of metal stuck in the joints could make the golem a bit stiff as it moved. However, the golems themselves would not know that was the case. As such, it was the creator's duty to observe and adjust the parts of the golems. Mark wanted that when he presented the golems to the girls, they were perfect. And now that the barriers were gone, he had to work on these golems more. Mark had to finish working on them as soon as possible. With the barriers gone, there were fewer reasons for Mark to stay around, and there were more reasons to go out. Yes, go out. Staying in the base was fine and all. The insides of the walls were safe, There was food and water, and taking baths was not a problem. Mark could even play games with his laptop and the few computers that Odalina and the others brought back. However, Mark was blessed or maybe cursed to do things. Things that he did not imagine that he had to do in the past. First was the task that Freed gave him. It was to find the remaining inheritors and determine if they were worthy of the psychic abilities that they received. Freed also gave him an impossible task to find the source of the dilemma plaguing the galaxy at the moment. Of course, it was not something that he could do anytime soon. And as said, it could even be impossible. Besides, he already knew from the eyes. The situation was a blunder created by the observer of another planet. The mystery was already answered if Mark was to be asked. There might be no need to leave this planet anymore. Aside from the tasks that Freed left him, Mark also needed to deal with the problem with Ouroboros. So far, Mark's group had experienced 4 hostile interactions with this Dark World organization. The first was when the individual called the Great One and his minions attacked Bay City's forces in Ninoy Aquino International Airport and even tried to abduct May. The second time was when the very same forces attacked Bay City, sacrificing people and resurrecting the flame demon, Garvlam. The third time was when the forces of Ouroboros' China branch located the mountain base and attacked it, with one of the eyes that became the Great One's puppet joined the fray. And lastly, during Chimetrus's resurrection, where several groups from different branches of Ouroboros attacked them. Although it was instigated by Ninth as a test for Mark and Chimetrus, there was no doubt that the members of Ouroboros were hostile from the start. With such a worldwide organization lurking in the shadows, Mark could never feel safe. Not only for himself but for those that he cared for. It was especially since the Great One had a serious interest in May. Sooner or later, Mark would make sure that this organization would vanish from the surface of this planet. Of course, it would not be easy, but it was not as impossible as flying to space to find the source of the pathogen where Psypathogen and Mutagen, even the Mechid pathogen, came from. These 3 tasks might already cost Mark a lifetime, but it was not all. And in the far future, or maybe soon, Mark was expected by the eyes and the observer to become the incarnation of an evil god. The very same foreign god whose drop of blood was the origin of the blood demon race. When that time came, he would need to deal with the spirit of the evil god for good. Of course, it was not something that he would tackle alone. However, it was still one of the tasks he was given, and the possibility of dying in this one compared to fighting the Ouroboros was much higher. Lastly, the situation in the Visayas. The mythological deity, Sinogo, became a gigantic infected crocodile with godly powers. He needed to be dealt with as soon as possible to prevent him from growing stronger. In the process, Magwayan told him to find the location of Kahilwayan, which was now supposed to be an abandoned kingdom of supreme god Kaptan. It was not a task that anyone else gave him. He imposed it on himself. However, it was necessary if he did not want the events on the planet of Arielis to repeat on Earth. It was not like he wanted to be a hero or something. He just did not like Earth to get destroyed now that he found a life he wanted to live in. Aside from those things, Mark also thought of visiting Infanta and, more importantly, Bay City. With the barriers down, the situations in those places could be much worse. Colleen's father was still in Infanta. Although she was not mentioning it, she extremely worried about her father's situation since yesterday. As for Bay City, Mark's friends were still there. But more importantly, General Perez and his family. The general took good care of May and the others in his absence. He would not hesitate to return the favor and help them now. Of course, there was still a problem. While New Infanta settlement was just a few hours of flight from the base, and now, Spera could open a portal to go there instantly, Bay City settlement was the complete opposite. Mark sighed. After all, he had a lot of things he wanted to do but also had difficult things that he had no choice but to do. But thinking about it, these things were on his list because he was capable of doing them. Mark was unlike most people in the apocalypse. Most people could only freeze behind their walls in fear of the infected, questioning their possibility of surviving and live on for tomorrow. Mark and his people had more leeway for survival than others. Thus, they had more opportunities to do things other than just trying to survive. With those things in mind, Mark continued to do his work with the golems, keeping in mind what things he should take note of and what he needed to adjust. Pretty much things like replacing the springs on Inaba's right hind leg or adjusting Kaval's neck joints. While on his work, however, someone entered Chio's subdimension. Mark turned his head and saw Mei with a lunchbox in her hands. "You're trying to skip lunch again," Mei said in a complaining tone the moment she arrived beside Mark. The guilty Mark did not reply, making Mei sigh. He then received the lunchbox from her and immediately ate under her watch. His eyes did not stop observing the two animal golems. The two walked around in the shape of an 8 repeatedly under his orders. They all looked good already. Gerger should present them to the girls already. They were eager to see the golems you made, Mei said as she looked at Brynhildr and the other two golems. They still need some more adjustments. Mark shrugged. These are not just toys. They will help protect the girls. Mei could only nod as she took a seat beside Mark. If these golems would keep the girls safe, there was no way that Mark would do careless work. You don't make it obvious, but you really love those three, don't you? Mei asked with a smile. Will you laugh if I say that I thought of wanting to have a daughter in the past? Mark suddenly said, making Mei look at him. Is it funny to be laughed at? Mei asked back. I think it's a good thing thinking about the future. A pretty impossible future at that time, Mark said. Thinking about wanting a daughter is just stupid if I never even had a single girlfriend in my entire life. Now, you have 3 daughters, though, Mei said as she started to blush, and someone to call your wife. Mark then smiled. It was a genuine smile that carried his true emotions. Yeah, I guess I got lucky because the apocalypse came, Mark said. If it didn't happen, I might be still stuck inside my house alone, waiting for anyone to contact me to make costume props for them. And then having problems whether I have enough budget for other things after I paid the house bills. At Mark's remarks about himself, Mei could only smile. She was the same. If the apocalypse did not come, Mei might still be some puppet of her family waiting for her wedding to a person she never liked for the sake of money. Mei might have had some traumatic experiences at first, but that became the start of her better life in the apocalypse. Sitting side by side, Mei leaned her head on Mark's shoulder. The two then watched the golems for some time. After a while, Mark already finished checking the golems for what to adjust. Soon, he would start readjusting things and creating new parts to replace those bad ones. But before that, Mark spoke to Mei. After finishing the golems, I plan to leave the base. Mei turned to Mark, but her expression showed that she was not surprised. Then, we will wait here. Leave the base to us, Mei said. She did say that she wanted to be with Mark in his journeys. But she would not force it if Mark said that he wanted to be alone. What are you saying? Mark asked, confused. Odal and Huey can lead the base just fine. Although Odal will probably grumble being left behind again. We are coming too, Mei asked. After all, Mark's future travels would probably end up more dangerous than the ones in the past. It would not be surprising if Mark decided to leave them behind to be safe. Of course, you and the girls are, Mark said as if it was a matter of fact. Although things are more dangerous, you and the girls are also getting stronger. I'm pretty sure we can just treat it as a kind of spicy outing. Mei could only look at Mark with half-closed eyes. He would probably be the only person that would call his dangerous travels an outing. In any case, Mei was happy. If it was dangerous, then just be more careful, and Mark would definitely not let them get into harm. But where are we going first? Mei asked so that she could prepare things for the journey. First would be New Infanta, then we will go back to Bay City. Mark replied. Mei nodded in response. In fact, she was also worried about Paula and Angeline in Bay City. Those two were her first friends in the apocalypse, after all. Day 194 to 9:21 a.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. 2 more days of arduous and meticulous adjustments and replacements, Mark finally said that the 3 golems were ready. At this moment, Mark was leading the 3 girls into the subdimension of the Night-Evered Spirit Tree. Together with them were May, Odalina, Jaya, who was carrying Theodore, Amika, and the 4 people involved in the creation of the 3 golems. The people they passed by greeted the group, being the leading figures of the base. Those greetings, however, were filled with curiosity and confusion. None of these people were in the know of what Mark was doing at the moment, and even more as to why this group was gathered right now. All they knew was that their mysterious leader was working on something. The group soon arrived at the base of Chio, the Night-Evered Spirit Tree, and the portal opened, welcoming them as soon as they arrived. As usual, the portal of a pure spirit tree in its subdimension was mysterious. Even though the major dimensions of Earth already fused, it was unaffected aside from the fact that its other side, the door that was supposed to go to the spirit dimension, turned into a pitch-black portal that who knows would go where. In the meantime, Mark told Chio not to open that portal in any case. After all, who knows where it would lead to or if it would have any effect on the spirit tree. Entering the portal, the 3 girls walked first by Mark's urging. After entering the subdimension, it was the 3 girls who saw the things that waited inside first. When they saw the rabbit and the dog golems, Abigail and Miracle's eyes went wide. Abigail might be a cat mutator, but in fact, she was quite afraid of cats and more of a dog person. It was the very same reason why she asked Mark to take Laylaps as a pet when they saw it. Her fear of cats was reasonable, though, as her hostile grandmother was a cat owner, and that very same cat bit her. To say, that cat contributed to the death of Abigail's mother. After all, they were caught in the middle of the apocalypse while bringing Abigail to a hospital because of that bite. Well, while a dog person, Abigail did not seem to like wolves or any wild kind of dog for some reason. As for Miracle, it was no news that she liked rabbits. When the 2 saw the animal golems, they could not help but look at Mark. Even the calm Abigail had her eyes filled with anticipation. They knew that Mark was making the golems for them, but they had no idea what he made them look like. Go on, Mark said. Gale, the dog hybrid is called Kaval. She's yours. And Miracle, yours is the bunny, Anaba. Getting Mark's go signal, the 2 little girls ran off to meet their new companions. On the other hand, it seemed that the 2 golems also recognized their masters without problems. Their cores absorbed the blood of the 2 little girls, and there was no way that they would fail in this one. When the 2 girls arrived in front of their golems, the golems behaved like tamed animals, rubbing their faces on the hands of the girls, making them even happier. It was just how Mark programmed the cores of the 2. As they were modeled as animals, they should have the same behavior. It was wonderful to see the 2 happy. It was even funny since Miracle was smaller than her rabbit golem. But instead of being afraid, she happily climbed up its back. And lastly, Iola. Given that the 2 animal golems were for her younger sisters, the one left was the female golem, staring at her and waiting for her to approach. Iola could not help but look at Mark in confusion. Although she did not mind what kind of golem her father would make for her, she did not expect to make a humanoid, not to mention the golem being something cute looking. Her crystal eyes were even more interesting to look at. Considering that her younger sisters got golems modeled after animals, it would not be surprising for hers to be the same. What's wrong? May asked, seeing Iola's confused looks. Why a beautiful girl? Iola asked, making everyone turn to Mark. In the first place, no one knew why she chose a humanoid and something that looked too human. Not to mention, the golem, although she was not as beautiful as May and the other good-looking people in the base, she had some sort of surreal cuteness in her appearance. Maybe it was her crystal eyes, but it was kind of hard to pinpoint the reason. That aside, the golem was also wearing something akin to French-made clothing, but just not made of cloth but metal. And as Mark was questioned, Mark shrugged as he patted Iola's head. Don't you like that old anime where girls turn into weapons? Mark said. You even rewatched a few episodes yesterday. At those words from Mark, Iola's confusion in her eyes turned into sparkles as she turned towards her golem in anticipation. Really? Iola turned back to Mark, asking for confirmation. Well, it's not as magical as the anime, Mark replied. Also, not just a weapon. Maybe we can call it more a power armor instead. Hearing Mark's reply, Iola followed her younger sisters and approached her own golem. Even the mature Iola could not hide her excitement, hearing what her golem was. Even if she's mature, she's still a child, Odalina said, looking at Iola. Mark and May could only agree. Sometimes, it made the two worried about Iola. Keeper's memories made her too mature for her age. It kept her away from interacting too much with other children. Seeing her behave like a child of her age was refreshing. Iola approached her golem. The two stared at each other. As the golem recognized her master, she bowed slightly, as a servant would do. Then, Iola realized. Papa. What's her name? Iola called out something that Mark did not tell her yet. With that excited tone, everyone in the group could not help but smile. Iola did not even realize how she was behaving at the moment. The group approached. Brynhilder, Mark answered Iola's question. It might be quite hard to pronounce. You can also call her Hild. Hild, Iola said, looking at her golem, and in response, Brynhilder looked at Iola, lilting her head. It made Iola pretty confused, though. That's how she asks if you need something, Mark said. Unfortunately, we haven't found any magic circuit for voice emulation, so she can't speak. It's the same for Inaba and Kaval. But not being able to make noises can't affect their capabilities. Mark then patted Brynhilder's shoulder and spoke to Iola. Aside from being a weapon, you can treat her as your personal servant. You can do simple stuff for you like carrying things. Iola listened to Mark. But in her expression, she was more eager to hear about Brynhilder being a weapon. "Wanna try it out?" Mark asked, knowing what Iola wanted. And in response, Iola nodded fiercely. Mark shrugged as he made the rest of the group stand back. Abigail and Miracle also joined in with their new pets tagging beside them. As it looked, there was no need to teach the two how to handle their golems. It was like taking care of pets, anyway. Just more intelligent than regular animals, however, and were capable of understanding human commands. In front of everyone, Brynhilder and Iola stood, waiting for Mark's instructions. Iola, tell her, execute 3. Then stand on the stepping plates and place your hands on her back where the shoulder plates should be. Mark told Iola. Iola was confused about the stepping plates that Mark mentioned as she could not see one. However, she still followed Mark's instructions. Execute 3. Iola commanded Brynhilder. At the given command, Brynhilder made her move. The female golem seemed to have kneeled down. However, it was not just simple kneeling. From her knee to her foot, it began transforming. Plates of metal moved around, opening her calves and revealing a pair of flat plates. Here, Iola understood that it was the stepping plate that Mark mentioned, and as instructed, Iola stepped on the plates and placed her hands on Brynhilder's back. But then, nothing happened. It made Iola turn to Mark once more. Form Valkyrie, Mark said. Copying Mark, Iola said the same. Form Valkyrie, and as Iola gave the command, Brynhild transformed. Iola panicked a bit as both her hands were suddenly stuck as the shoulder plates deformed. Don't move, Mark said. It's part of the process. Just let it move and follow. Hearing Mark's voice, Iola stopped struggling. She then let Brynhilder move her hands, arms, and even feet. Everyone watched the spectacle that only Mark had seen before. Even the 4 that helped in making the golems did not see this one as Mark kept it secret. Not even Annika that was helping see the magic circuits work. All she saw were the parts and not the testing. Before their eyes, the female golem, Brynhilder, transformed. They noticed that her entire body was turning inside out. Some of the mechanisms even folded and flipped, revealing her hollow inside. Finally, Brynhilder's face split into 2, moving towards the side like a sliding door. At the process of transformation, Iola's body appeared to be being encased into Brynhilder. Her arms and legs became Brynhilder's too. By the time she realized, She was wearing the very same golem that kneeled in front of her like a high-tech mechanical armor. And as finishing touches, Iola's face fitted into Brynhilder's head that turned into a helmet. The process lasted about 30 seconds. In the end, everyone was looking at Iola, who now looked like a mechanical Valkyrie, holding a sword. Iola could not help but feel strange and excited at the same time. Moving her hands, or rather, the mechanical hands that did not belong to her, it felt odd. Even more strange was that even though she was wearing what was supposed to be a heavy thing, she was not feeling anything at all. It was as if the new armor was nothing but an extension of her body. "How does it feel?" Mark asked as he approached. "I feel odd." Iola replied. "Well, it's the first time you used it." Mark smiled. "You will get used to it with practice." Then, Mark added, "Remember the command. Form Valkyrie. In this form, you can float about a foot above the ground. The speed is not that fast, though. Also you can only fly for a minute for the whole day. Power is quite a problem. Still, why not try it?" "How?" Iola asked. "Just think of it. The helmet you wear right now should be able to sense your mental signals and send them to the core. If you need to command Hild in this form, just say it with your mind." Iola nodded and thought of floating, and as her thoughts were transmitted, several clear plates extended behind her back and released light. This scene was quite familiar to Elia and Shemetris. It was the very same circuit that made their floating vessel fly. There, Iola could be seen hovering from the ground. It just lasted some time, however, as Iola almost lost balance and fell to the ground. Mark created an amazing thing for Iola, but it would take some practice and effort to fully utilize it. Everyone surrounded Iola, looking at Mark's unique work. At the same time, Miracle and Abigail asked if their golems could do the same. Unfortunately, they were dejected when Mark said no. In the first place, the two were already above human standards in terms of physical abilities. Making them similar golems would just hinder them instead. However, their dejection did not last long as Mark taught them the other capabilities of their golems. Day 197 to 10:21 a.m. New Infanta Settlement, Infanta, Province of Quezon. 7 days after the barrier vanished, the military settlement of Infanta, Quezon, was now in a better state. Using the information that Major Bautista brought back from Mark's base about the barrier and the Mechids, the general pushed military efforts to the maximum. General Faustino wanted to ensure that there would be at least a barricade between the threats and their people once the day no one looked forward to came. But the time they had, even if the duration was extended by a few extra days from the estimated date, was not enough. There was no need to mention that the settlement was now lacking in construction materials. It was the second time that the military had to build a settlement, with the first one getting destroyed by the storm surge. They managed to salvage materials from the ruined settlement and transported them. However, it was already used up in making walls and houses in the new location. Unfortunately, all those new walls and structures all went down during the earthquake a month ago, even taking the lives of more than 1,000 people. Large amounts of their food and water supplies were wasted along with all the destruction, making their situation even more difficult. A good thing was that they had their scientists monitoring the radiation levels and were knowledgeable enough to know the tolerable level that humans could endure. They also had doctors to help treat the symptoms and protection gear that was still intact. Due to this, they were able to dispatch people to gather materials way before the barrier vanished. The group was just small, and going outside was dangerous. However, it was way better than doing nothing and regret when the worst came. Still, with the whole country, no, the whole world changed for the worse. It was impossible to gather construction materials, especially those used in modern structures. Modern materials might be impossible to gather, but there was one material abundant nowadays. Trees, to be exact, wood. The dimensions fused, and all the untouched forests in the spirit dimension were transported into the new earth. There were trees, literally everywhere. Furthermore, these were not just regular trees. These were trees at least hundreds of years old. Some even might be in their 1,000 years, seeing how towering they were. With all these trees, it became possible to at least build palisades around the entirety of the settlement. Of course, it would not be easy. In the least, they had to prioritize the east and southern areas of the settlement, considering that the north and west areas were backed into the Agos River. It was not like the current Agos River was free of danger. In fact, it was even more dangerous than before. It was also still unconfirmed whether the mechanical shark from before was dead or was just in hiding. At least, it did not make any appearance since the time it was shot down by Mark. The soldiers that fought the mechanical shark that time wished that it died for good. Still, the military was not letting their guards down, keeping their eyes at the river 24/7. Despite the danger, the river also provided the settlement with fish. The kinds of fish they caught looked nowhere like the fish they knew before the apocalypse, however. The fish were too large, with the smallest ones sized around an adult's forearm. Furthermore, the fishes looked unappetizing, having horns, thorns around their bodies, and some even had fangs. Even so, the scientists confirmed these ugly fishes to be edible, solving the issue of food slightly. And now, with everything planned by General Faustino and Major Bautista, the rest of the time that the barrier was still up was spent in logging and constructing the palisades. Getting enough manpower was not easy, however. At first, all the work was done with the construction workers and the soldiers. General Faustino decided to disclose some information about the barrier, especially the estimated time it would last. The announcement was led by Major Bautista. However, it did not go smoothly. Although not everyone, many people knew that Major Bautista was not present in the settlement during the catastrophe. Some even saw it when he returned with Mark's group riding on the back of a dragon. And looking at the Major's state and comparing him with everyone here in the entire settlement, he was in a completely fine state. It was the same state that Mark's group was in when they visited. No wounds, clean, and wearing decent clothing. It was as if they knew that the disaster was coming and was prepared. This made a rumor spread that Major Bautista and the other people that came with him left to save themselves. It was not really something that they had proof to justify. But people in peril were good at putting the blame on anything just to make them feel better. The announcement was not received positively, and Major Bautista was even doubted about how they managed to get the information they were disclosing. With all the doubts and rumors, it was not wrong to say that the announcement was a failed event. Even the credibility of the information was questioned. Some did not believe the barrier that they could not even see. Still, the people might have doubts, but it was true that they needed to move and help the military at this moment. With the settlement all ruined, they were all prone to facing danger without any protection. Thus, from one person, it slowly grew. With the remaining number of people, it would not be too hard to build the palisades that General Faustino and Major Bautista wanted to build. While it was true that the credibility of the military was getting low, it was also proven that people would move as long as there was someone to lead them. With the return of Major Bautista, the only military officer left together with the injured General Faustino, things were getting back on the track to survival, albeit slowly. Furthermore, with the strange tribe beginning to work with the military, getting manpower became easier. There was no need to say that the magical tribe could move outside the barrier despite the radiation. They became the main manpower cutting trees for the palisades. Still, despite the work being done, many people questioned the existence of the barrier. It was until they saw the cellophane-like dome that appeared a few days ago. The dome covered the entirety of the settlement, enveloping everyone in fear. It was when they remembered the announcement about the existence of the barrier. That was the first time they believed the military. However, it was already late. That event was the time the barrier vanished. Everyone felt it when the air of danger blew all over the settlement once more. Fortunately, the palisade on the southern side of the settlement was already finished, and the eastern side was halfway done. The settlement was still not completely safe, but these huge wooden stakes should at least hinder enemies, allowing the military to have more time to prepare against threats. Major Bautista stood on the southern side of the settlement, watching the newly built walls. He could only sigh. These walls would not last long, especially against the Mechids. However, it was the only thing they would build for now. In his eyes, He could not help but compare these palisades to the walls of the mountain base. Damn it. Our walls cannot be compared to that, Major Bautista whispered, trying to erase the unnecessary thoughts in his mind. Compared to what? All of a sudden, a familiar voice was heard from behind him. Major Bautista turned around. It was his daughter, no, daughters. Dad! Carla yelled, running towards the Major and hugging him. Compared to what, Dad? Colleen asked, repeating her question. It's nothing. Major Bautista shook his head, returning Carla's embrace. What are you two doing here? It was a surprise to the Major. After all, it had been a while since he chose to stay here and separate from his daughters. He did not expect that they would just appear here all of a sudden. We came to visit, Colleen said with a suspicious smile. I was worried, but the place looks better than before. Colleen panned her eyes on the palisade. People were working on the new walls diligently, making sure that the walls would not just fall instantly. Things are getting better. Major Bautista nodded. But if we want this place to be safe, we need to do more than just this. It was not only Major Bautista. All the people involved in building the walls knew that it was just a temporary measure. They need to more and develop further than this. By the way, the general is calling for you, Colleen said. Mark is with him right now. Let's go then, Major Bautista said as he called for another soldier to temporarily take his post. Walking back from the construction area to the military camp did not take too long. The military camp was on the south of the settlement now, after all. This time, however, instead of the infirmary, they went to a separate tent. The tent was quite large, but it did not only serve as the general's private quarters. It was also the current meeting place for the planning they were making for the settlement. The three entered the tent and saw several people inside. Mark was there, together with May and Spera. Alana was also present, and so was the rest of Joash's group. It was the group that went to the mountain base together with Major Bautista because of Mark's request to borrow Professor Sherville Sandoval. Why are all of you here? Major Bautista could not help but blurt out, seeing the group supposed to serve as Professor Sandoval's bodyguards here. Ask that later and come in. It was not anyone from the group that answered the Major but General Faustino. Together with General Faustino was, of course, the mercenary Jones Galley. In the middle was Ardenaris, the leader of the tribe of magical races in the settlement. Major Bautista came in with his daughters and heard about the reason they were here. Apparently, there was no reason for them to stay in Mark's base any longer. Professor Sandoval's safety was not an issue in the first place, and they only came for formalities. The mountain base sure was a good place to stay. However, they were needed more here in the settlement where they came from. Surely, General Faustino and Major Bautista were touched by that thought and were definitely happy to welcome them back. Professor Sandoval and Amika's family decided to stay in the mountain base, however. It was not an issue considering their safety was a priority. Actually, I'm also staying here with Alana and Carla for a while, is that all right? Colleen said to her father. Are you sure? You know the state of the settlement. The people might not welcome you here too. Major Bautista asked Colleen. After all, the new Infanta settlement was not like the mountain base. There were a lot of things missing here. Not to mention the current state of the settlement. Who cares about them? Colleen replied. You already said it. The settlement is not safe. Your job is to keep the people safe, then it will be our job to keep you safe. Major Bautista could not reply to that. His daughter was being resolute at this time for him to deny it. However, there was another reason as to why Colleen and the others chose this time to return. This is the best time for them to go back here, Mark said. I plan to go to Bay City to check on the situation there. I will take some people with me, including her. Mark pointed at Spera, who some of them knew was capable of opening portals. Those words from Mark explained the reason. With both Mark and Spera away from the base, there was no way for these people to go back here. It was really the best time, as Mark said. Day 197 to 11:21 a.m. Central Tent, Military Camp, New Infanta Settlement, Infanta, Province of Quezon. The return of Colleen and the others touched the hearts of Major Bautista and General Faustino. Right now, manpower was what they needed the most. And although uncontrollable in the past, Colleen was a powerful mutator that needed dozens of soldiers to subdue. Since her powers were now controlled, it would not be wrong to say that she could be one of the most powerful individuals in this place. With the help of Colleen and the others, they might have more chances to withstand the dangers that the settlement would face in the future. While it was true that Colleen's case made people from the ruined real settlement hate her existence, they would not have any say in this case now. They could only accept her return as the settlement needed it. Of course, General Faustino was sure that not everyone would see this situation in a positive light. It would definitely be the case in the political faction of the settlement. With the return of this group, the military would have more strong people in their lines. It would be harder for the political faction to make any movements against the military, even in the dark. Furthermore, the people from the also ruined Eastport settlement had no grievance towards Colleen. If they knew how strong she was, those people would choose to cooperate with the military more than before. It would be nothing but a win scenario for the military in this case. With those thoughts, General Faustino felt a gaze. He turned and saw that it was coming from Mark. The general could only nod, realizing that Mark might also have these things in consideration. By the way, Mark spoke to the general. Do you guys have any place to store supplies? Store supplies? You mean a warehouse? General Faustino replied in thought. Unfortunately, no. Most of the supplies recovered are placed in a specific area outside, only covered by stitched-up tarpaulins. Jones Galley chimed in. That is right. General Faustino nodded with a sigh. We prioritized the construction of the palisades since the last time your group visited. Even dwellings for the refugees and soldiers were lagging behind in schedule that we are receiving complaints already. In the least, we put more important necessities like food, water, and medicine inside tents. It was not surprising. Everything was ruined, after all. Still, Mark asked just in case. Why did you ask that suddenly? Major Bautista asked. It was when Mark said the surprise. We brought some supplies, Mark answered. Well, it's not really a donation or anything. Both Colleen and Mizuki worked hard to gather supplies for the base together with everyone. It's only natural for me to bring their share since they are returning and staying here. Then, Mark turned to Major Bautista. We brought some for you too. Mark said to the major's surprise. For me? Major Bautista asked, speechless and confused. It's your salary, Dad. Colleen answered her father with a smile. Salary? The major was even more confused. You helped instruct the training this past month, right? Mark said. That's a payment for instructing my people. The surprise of Major Bautista intensified, but I didn't really. The major was about to deny, but Mark did not let him continue. I know you didn't expect to receive something, but just accept it. I don't want to owe favors to people. Major Bautista fell silent. Mark did not say it directly, but he knew the meaning of Mark's words. Mark did not want to owe anything to outsiders. It was quite a frustrating thought, but it was true nonetheless. All right, I'll accept it. Major Bautista sighed. Even so, he looked a bit happy about the unexpected things he would be receiving. How long had it been since he positively received a surprise? The surprises during the apocalypse were mostly negative, after all. Well, there's still a problem on where to place them. Mark said. I think it's fine to put them behind this tent, Jones suggested. We should still have some unused tarps to cover it. Is his suggestion fine? General Faustino asked Mark. Don't ask me. Mark shrugged his shoulders. These supplies aren't mine. That turned the attention to the people Mark mentioned to receive the supplies, and, of course, they did not have problems with it. There, everyone wanted to move to the back of the tent. They all wanted to see what Mark brought, as even Alana and Colleen had not seen it. Then, Alfonso, Jones, you two oversee the things. General Faustino said to the major and the mercenary. After all, he was now a disabled person. There was no way for him to move on his own from place to place unless he was being carried by someone. He could ask Jones to carry him, but it would look shameful, especially since he needed to keep his pride as the leader of this place. "Oh, right." Mark suddenly spoke. "General, this is for you." Mark then stood, facing an open space at the side of the tent. He then stretched his hand forward and caused a black hole to open. It was not a new sight to everyone here, except for Ardenaris, who looked really surprised. And out of that hole, a pretty large item came out. As he saw the item, General Faustino's eyes started to get wet. General Faustino lost his right leg while his left leg was already diagnosed to be permanently broken. His left leg was severely injured, and his bones were broken into pieces. It was too severe that even the regeneration medicine had no effect on it. To a dedicated soldier, the loss of his legs was similar to losing the life he knew. Still, what made the general not lose his mind and heart was his duty to the people of this settlement. Even so, it could not be said that he was mentally healthy after the incident. Losing his legs, not to mention being cooped up in either the infirmary or this tent, made his mental health even worse. In fact, Jones and Faustino began to worry about General Faustino. Although the general was fine outside and was smiling when facing other people, he was already showing signs of depression when left alone. The most that the two could do, however, was give General Faustino company inside his tent. Going outside for a walk might have helped. However, as said before, General Faustino did not like the idea of being carried around. Not only would it show others that he was not in a good state, but it would also harm his dignity as the leader of this settlement. It would have been good if they had a wheelchair. However, where were they going to get one? Everything was destroyed, after all. The thought of making one was also scrapped since they did not have the right equipment. But as Mark took out the item, even Jones and Major Bautista could not help but become shaken in delight. The usually indifferent Mark took out a finely made wheelchair. It had wheels and even other rubber and non-metal parts that a wheelchair had. However, the frame and other metal parts were all black-colored. The color made Jones remember the first time he and Mark met. This reddish-black sheen was the very same metal that was used in his weapons at that time. It meant that this wheelchair was personally made by Mark's hands. General Faustino was speechless. He was also trying to hold back his tears. This scene made Mark sigh. He could tell how grieved the general was since the first time he saw him injured. No one might be able to see it since General Faustino was good at hiding his emotions. But an empath, like Mark, would see through it clearly. And here, General Faustino was extremely delighted to the point that he could tear up at any time. Mark just gave him hope, after all. The atmosphere in the tent turned sour, but in a good way. Seeing General Faustino unable to say anything as he stared at the wheelchair while holding up his tears was heartbreaking. Just how much depression did this man shoulder up to now? "Why not try it?" Mark suggested. "Can I, really?" General Faustino asked. "Just try it." Mark insisted. "Or do you want me to take it back?" That question made everyone speechless, and by what it looked like, Mark was not joking either. Mark's sudden change of attitude made General Faustino shaken that his emotions turned from delight to fear that Mark would actually take it back. His tears vanished as he turned to Jones. "Help me get into that." Of course, Jones happily complied. Everyone's attention was now on General Faustino as he tried the wheelchair. "It's a perfect fit," General Faustino said in surprise. There was no feeling of discomfort at all as he sat in the wheelchair. It was as if this wheelchair was made solely for him. This made him wonder how Mark got his measurements. "Then, you can go out now," Mark said. "It's better if you also oversee the supplies since I also brought some extra things." General Faustino nodded. It would also be the first time he would be able to go out without being carried by anyone. And there, everyone in the tent was present as Mark and May took out the supplies from their rings. The space in the rings was not exactly a cube. Each item was separated inside if it was not put in a container. The shape of the item was also measured by its surface area, which meant that an irregularly shaped item would not take extra space. but by Mark's estimate, both the rings had a 5-meter by 5-meter space inside if measured in a cube. These spatial rings could sure fit a whole load of items. And both Mark and May emptied both their rings, filled with boxes upon boxes of supplies divided into several groups stacked together. Alana, Colleen, Carla, and Major Bautista had their shares. Even the other members that returned had some supplies grouped together as they also worked in the base, albeit not a lot. But what made them wonder was an extra stack of boxes. Furthermore, a few boxes were not stacked together and sounded like they had glass bottles inside. What about these? Major Bautista asked, since no one could tell what the boxes contained with the boxes turned inside out. The stacked boxes are food and drinks, Mark said, opening one box containing cans of cola. These will expire soon, and we are sure that we can't consume these before they expire. So we decided to give these to you guys. Those words made the soldiers happy. It might be expiring soon, but with how many people here, relying on the military, it might not even be enough. Even so, it was a big help. And these? Mark opened one of the boxes that were not stacked. And to the surprise of General Faustino and the others, the contents of the boxes were liquor. A high-quality liquor at that. Some idiots took boxes of liquor back to the base instead of carrying food and water, Mark said as his eyes looked to the side towards Colleen and Alana, making them blush. I'm not really against it, but they took too much, so I'm giving some here. Mark then turned to General Faustino and Major Bautista. I'm pretty sure you need something to motivate the people into work. You can use these. There are also a few boxes of cigarettes there. Just look for it. Are you sure we can have these? General Faustino asked. For sure. It was too much that they were receiving all these from Mark all of a sudden. You can have it, Mark replied with a nod. Besides, it's not a donation or something. I'll be borrowing Professor Sandoval for a prolonged time, so I thought I need to give some compensation. Mark's words made the three heads of the military look at each other. With a shrug, they could only nod. It was not really necessary. After all, even if Professor Sandoval returned, there would not be a lot of work to do for him. Most of the laboratory equipment they had was destroyed, and they were only able to salvage necessary ones. However, what Mark said was true. They needed something to drive the people to work more. For example, liquor and cigarettes, which were now luxuries. It would definitely help a lot, and they could only agree to accept. In any case, General Faustino managed to show a smile he could not for a long time. He was really grateful for the sudden blessing that came unexpectedly. Day 197 to 11:52 a.m. Military encampment, New Infanta settlement, Infanta, province of Quezon. After delivering the supplies, there was no reason for Mark, May, and Spera to stay. They also had other things to do, specifically, preparing for their journey towards Bay City. Be careful on your travels, all right? Colleen said, hugging May and Spera. This emotional but childish embrace was expected from Colleen, and May did not mind it. Spera, however, was extremely embarrassed and was looking at Mark, asking for help. Although she was trying her best to gain control of her emotions, Spera was still far from it. Mark had no intention to help, however, looking away while slightly shaking his head. It did not take too long, though. You too. Colleen let go of the two and immediately jumped to also give Mark an embrace. Even to Mark, it was unexpected, especially with many people, including her father, watching. Well, it should not be surprising either, considering that Colleen did worse back at the time they first met. That's what you get, Spera murmured to the side. Me too. And there, Carla also jumped in, giving the three leaving people short hugs. The others also gave their farewell and thanks for the hospitality in the mountain base. Joash and the others could say that staying in the mountain base was the best experience they had since the apocalypse came. The safety, the baths, the food, and even the people. It was completely different from any military settlement they had been to. But, of course, it was not their home, and they had to return. It might be a pity, but they should not get used to the good life in the mountain base when their own settlement was facing struggles. With the farewells done, it was time for the three to depart. Spera opened a portal in front of everyone, where Mark, May, and Spera entered and vanished in. Although they had seen it before, it still left General Faustino and the others in awe. To them, the existence of magic was still an unfamiliar thing. Still, no one would be able to deny how convenient it was. Using Spera's portals, Mark's group could go anywhere in a blink of an eye. There would be no need to travel across the dangerous apocalyptic landscape, and there was no need to fight extremely terrifying dangers. Even if they would not admit it, they knew they wished they had someone like Spera in their ranks. In any case, there was no need to mull over such useless thoughts. There they go. Alana voiced out, shrugging. We'll definitely miss the base. Looking around, even though it was said to be better than before, Alana could see how the settlement was still in tatters. Living here was not the same in Mark's base and was not even comparable to their life back in real settlement. Don't say that, Colleen said to her best friend. You're just going to remind us if you say that. You too. Major Bautista scratched his head. If you two are going to say those things, you should have stayed there instead. This conversation turned into a short friendly banter afterward. It only stopped as Jones Galley dropped a question. Mark seems to be in a good mood, Jones said, looking at the supplies. I don't think he would just give out supplies for no particular reason. That is right. General Faustino nodded. He might say that it's because of Professor Sandoval, but Mark is a smart person. He should know that it is unnecessary since just keeping the professor safe was more than enough. It's a father's mood, I guess, Colleen said, making Jones, General Faustino, and her father look at her in askance. Mark made something absurd for his daughters, and they really liked their new toys, Alana explained. He's not showing it in his face, but he seemed really happy to see his daughters like his creations. Yeah, he's like you, Dad, Colleen said to her father. It's like back then when you brought home a stuffed toy and was worried if I didn't like it. Then you looked really happy with my reaction to the toy. Relieving those memories, Major Bautista was a bit embarrassed. Do I really look happy that time? Major Bautista asked. I didn't really notice it. Colleen shook her head, but Mom saw it and told me later. Those words gave a bitter smile to Major Bautista's face. It was, after all, a memory of his deceased wife. That reaction created silence in the group. It was no news to the people here what happened to Major Bautista's wife and son. And only Colleen being the only remaining member of his family, and well, of course, the new addition, Carla. With those thoughts in mind, they all moved to do things they had to do. First of all, to arrange the dwellings of the people that returned. The soldiers could just join in the already built barracks, but Joash's group was different. Not only was Joash an important member of the settlement, but they were also precious, evolvers. Even other groups of mutators and evolvers in the settlement were given their own tent to use. As for Colleen, Alana, and Carla, they also needed a separate tent. Most importantly, they needed to build a storage area for the supplies that Mark brought back. All of it was precious, especially the luxury items. With those arrangements, the arrival of the returnees ended. ******************************** Day 197 to 3:15 p.m. Military encampment, New Infanta settlement, Infanta, province of Quezon. Soon, however, it did not take long, and the existence of the newly acquired supplies reached the masses. Who is it? General Faustino slammed on the table, looking at the newly assigned officers of the settlement. It was supposed to be a happy day for the general, receiving a wheelchair and supplies from Mark. Yet, in a few hours, here he was, with his mood fouled as he looked at the new officers. The qualifications of these new officers were still lacking in military standards. However, they needed some competent people to help organize the settlement. But their qualifications were not the issue this time around. The supplies they received from Mark were a lot but not a whole lot. That was why they could still not splurge on it and intended to continue on the current amount of rations. If not, these newly acquired supplies would not last long and would be used up way before the expiry dates. That was why the general decided to hide the existence of the new supplies and kept it as military knowledge. Yet, the news about the supplies already reached the masses for some reason and spread fast. And rumors being rumors, it blew up, turning into false information. The quantity of the supplies in the rumors was way higher than what they actually received from Mark. Not to mention that not all of it was owned by the entire military but was the private property of the people Mark gave the supplies to. Furthermore, the soldiers knew the distribution of the supplies, considering many soldiers were also present around to watch when Mark and May took out the supplies. Many soldiers heard Mark say which belonged to who. And yet, the rumors that reached the masses were completely different. It was as if it was deliberately spread. If this continued, things would get out of control. And to the general's question, none of the new officers could answer. "It's no use asking them, General." Jones, standing behind the general, spoke. "They're new to their positions. They still need to get used to it. They might not even know every single person that belonged to their platoon." "Huh." The general sighed. "It may be true, but there is no doubt that one of us leaked the information. Your men are your responsibilities." General Faustino turned to the new officers. "Investigate who is the one that leaked the information outside. You are all dismissed." With salutes, the new officers walked out of the tent, leaving the distressed General Faustino. The only ones left with the general were Major Bautista and Jones Galley. "What a headache." General Faustino rubbed his wrinkled forehead. "It is not hard to see who caused this," Jones said, making Major Bautista agree. "I know." General Faustino sighed. "What I can't accept is that one of us became their spy." General Faustino was right to feel dismayed over this situation. The only pillar that keeping his settlement in control was the military. There was another pillar, the political faction, but they were not really contributing as much as the former. Nonetheless, it was not new that the political faction was unhappy with the military taking control of everything. There were no clashes in the open. But the political faction had done many things against the military in the dark. It was very likely that this was also their hands in work in this situation. And the worst of it, one, or possibly more, of their soldiers were working with the opposing faction. General Faustino could not accept it, while in deep thoughts, however. Clang. 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 The sounds of alarm bells echoed across the military encampment. There was no need to think about it. The three heads of the military moved out of the tent to see what was happening. It was really nice that General Faustino received the wheelchair this morning. Instead of being carried on Jones' back, he was now being pushed on it. Just as the three went out of their tent, a young soldier came running to them just in time. Major Bautista could not help but frown, however. He recognized this soldier. He was one of the soldiers in the scouting squad. Their group was supposed to be scouting the area at this time. It was not hard to forget this soldier since he was one of the few evolvers in the military, Private de Malanta. His ability was focused on speed, being the best as a scout and as a messenger. "General," the soldier called out, "a monster is on its way here. We spotted a 4-meter-tall quadrupedal monster moving in the settlement's direction. The rest of my squad was still monitoring the monster, but we expect it to arrive in 5 minutes. Alfonso." General Faustino turned to Major Bautista. "Alert the soldiers and lead them to intercept the possible threat. I know they just arrived this morning, but if possible, let your daughter and Miss Alana participate." "Yes, General." Major Bautista immediately replied and left. Then, General Faustino turned back to the young soldier. "Monster, you say?" the general asked. "It's not an infected, or a mechid, not even an evolved animal." "I'm sorry, but we are not sure, sir." Private de Malanta apologized sincerely. It only looked like a gigantic animal, but it seemed to have tentacle-like appendages all over its body, and we can't confirm whether it had a head or not as there was nothing to resemble such parts on its body. "An unknown, huh? It's been a while since we have to use this term." General Faustino murmured. "In any case, we should also get ready." General Faustino said. "But General, you..." Jones tried to stop the general. He might already have a wheelchair, but he was still not in perfect shape to command in the field. I know, but I can't just stay behind. We are going to encounter an unknown. We don't know whether our methods to deal with the threats we know would work. All right, General. Jones agreed with a sigh, but I will always stay beside you. That is fine. But when things became dangerous, I will retreat safely and send you to battle. Everyone readied for battle while the alarms made the non-combatants cower in fear. They planned to intercept the threat outside the walls. Not only that the walls were still incomplete, but there was no way that a wall that did not even reach 3 meters would stop a 4-meter-tall creature. Luckily, a wide area south of the settlement was already cleared of trees and other debris. It was a good place to intercept the danger. Soon, the rest of the scouting squad arrived. There was no need to report the arrival of the monster as it was already in sight. And everyone's reaction. Holy sh**t. It sure was a monster. Day 197 to 3:31 p.m. Southern outskirts, New Infanta Settlement, Infanta, province of Quezon. It was a creature that was at least 4 meters tall, about 22 meters long, and about 2.5 meters wide. This 4-legged thing sure was a gigantic monster. However, its appearance did not make much sense. As the scouts reported, it did not have a head or a neck, making it hard to identify. Furthermore, its cucumber-shaped body looked like a cluster of pulsating flesh, extending more than 100 flesh-like tentacles all over it. It had 4 legs that seemed to belong to a bovine animal, considering its gigantic more than half-meter-tall hooves and the proportion of its fatty legs. But even with the appearance of its legs, it would be hard to determine whether it was a cow or any other bovine animal. Not like it mattered anymore. The monster shambled continuously towards the direction of the settlement. Its way of walking was rather wobbly, as if it was struggling to maintain balance. But no matter how it walked, whether it was slow or fast, it would be a threat to the New Infanta settlement in no time. General. The leader of the scouting squad saluted as he met General Faustino. How is it? General Faustino asked. Any new reports about that monster? The duty of the scouting squad was not limited to just searching for any possible danger and informing the settlement. While one of the squad members served as a messenger, the others would continue to observe the threat and, if plausible, do some tests. The most important test was to try and deviate the threat away from the settlement's direction. Sorry, General, but there's very little we could gather. The scout squad leader, Lieutenant Dominguez, replied to the general's question. Following the reply, Lieutenant Dominguez gave his report.
The creature did not seem to be an infected, or possibly, it was some sort of a deviant mutation. The scout squad determined it by trying to use themselves as bait to lure the creature towards another direction. It was a dangerous endeavor, but it would be worth it if they could lead the creature away or buy a little bit more time. However, it failed and ignored the small group of soldiers, continuing on its way towards the settlement. The lieutenant reported their other observations, like how seemingly unstable the creature walked. In fact, it stumbled several times on its way. Using the observations of the scouting squad, the general formulated the plans. Even if the time they had was too short, they needed to create a plan to coordinate the movements of the soldiers and everyone participating in this defensive operation. They could tackle the situation as is. However, it was not only manpower that the military was lacking but also weapons and ammunition. Their machinery to produce bullets was long destroyed along with their remaining materials. What they have currently was limited. They had to make use of every single bullet as efficiently as possible. After formulating the plan, General Faustino immediately relayed it to his soldiers. From their current position, they retreated back as much as they could while leaving a safe distance from the newly built walls of the settlement. However, they did not withdraw without leaving a few gifts for their unwanted incoming guest. Everyone hid behind trees and bushes, weapons held tightly in their hands, waiting for the time to strike. Bam! 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 The thumping sounds came closer and closer. The creature continued its shambling strides towards the settlement's direction. wiggling its undeterminable number of disgusting tentacles all over its body. And then, boom, boom. The sounds of several chained explosions echoed into everyone's ears. Normally, the sound of explosions would make anyone perplexed. But this time, the soldiers were delighted to hear such loud booming sounds enter their ears. Those sounds meant only one thing. The creature stepped on the gifts they left on its way. What gifts? Landmines, of course. Landmines were reliable traps against enemies. However, depending on the situation, it could also serve as a double-edged sword. These explosive traps could be used to surround the settlement. But since the settlement was still recovering and had yet to establish a proper border, these landmines were still unusable as they could harm civilians and workers. Furthermore, while making a minefield was a good method of defense, there was no guarantee on who would step on the landmine. It could be a gigantic, infected, or it may be wasted on a shambling eater. That was why it was better to keep the landmines for certain determined situations. This was one of those situations. Using the landmine on the creature in front of them was a good strategy. In the first place, it was already moving unstably. If the soldiers could take off or, at least, damage the monster's legs, it would be easier to deal with this thing. Thud. Squish. As the general intended, the gigantic creature fell to the ground with a loud sound. And as if telling everyone of how sticky and fleshy its body was, the disgusting sound of meat being squished also entered their ears. The creature fell, but the soldiers did not move from their position. They were waiting for Major Bautista's signal. Thump, thump, thump. Because of the explosion, dust and smoke covered the area around the creature. However, everyone could hear the thumping sounds of its struggles. Who knows what was going on? Maybe it was still trying to stand up, or it could be violently squirming its body to move. Stand by. Major Bautista's voice echoed into the few radios they still had working. Those that had the radios relayed the instructions to the other soldiers. It was a waiting game for now. There was no way that they would just storm an enemy shrouded in the veil of dust and smoke. But before the dust and smoke dissipated, everyone noticed that the thumping sounds suddenly came to a stop. Did the creature die? Maybe it stopped struggling. Before everyone could make more speculations, however, they were subjected to a sight they did not expect. Splat. The sound of a loud splatter entered their ears. It was as if a large mound of flesh suddenly exploded. Ah! Before everyone could react, screams and shouts echoed as they noticed the sky above them. Fall back! Fall back! Major Bautista hurriedly ordered as they faced the unexpected situation. It was raining with large elongated things they had yet to identify. What they were sure of, however, these things flew off from the veil of dust and smoke to the sky. The soldiers quickly abandoned their positions. Some of them moved even before the order came. They could not be blamed, however. There were countless of these elongated things that came flying everywhere. Major Bautista's order and the response of the soldiers were quick. But even with that, their speed was not enough. Many soldiers closest to where the creature fell were hit by the elongated things. And there, they realized what these elongated objects were. About as thick as an adult's arm and about 2 meters long with a flesh-like appearance and texture. The soldiers were sure these things were the tentacles of that creature. But why did these things go flying all of a sudden? Knowing that these things were the creature's tentacles did not make the situation any better, although it gave the soldiers courage to take off the tentacles that landed on their bodies and throw them away as they retreated. That was when the horror started. A soldier had a tentacle land on his right shoulder. He immediately grabbed it to throw it away when he felt something wrap on his neck. The squishy and sticky feeling on his neck and the smell of rotting flesh was not something pleasant to experience. But that was the least of his concern as he was unable to remove the tightening grip of the tentacle as it began to constrict his neck. The soldier fell down, unable to breathe. His mouth was wide open as he tried to gasp for air. 2 of his comrades stopped to help the poor soldier. But they were late. The widely opened mouth of the soldier was suddenly assaulted with the taste of rotting flesh. That was when the soldier noticed that the tentacle that was constricting him began to make its way into his body through his mouth. With his eyes wide open, the soldier struggled. He pulled hard on the tentacle that was entering his mouth but failed to do so. Even so, he continued to pull it out. It was when his eyes dilated in pain. The two comrades of the soldier could only stop on their tracks as they saw the soldier's head get torn from his neck and fall to the ground, making the rest of the tentacle slip through his mouth. *T. One of the two cursed, seeing the death of the soldier. It was not only that soldier who experienced such a painful death. There were others who were just as unlucky as him. They were mistaken. These things were not just tentacles. It became apparent when each soldier was beheaded the same way, with the supposed tentacles constricting their victims and entering their mouths. The beheaded soldiers fell on the ground, lifeless. However, it did not take long for all of them to slowly stand up once again. The tentacles that entered their bodies pierced bloody holes and coiled in and out of their flesh, with both ends dangling out of the holes disgustingly. What the FCK is this? Jones cursed out loud, seeing the unfortunate spectacle before them. They just lost many soldiers in a short time without any of them being able to react at all. The dead soldiers aside, there were also a large number of those tentacles squirming around, obviously chasing after the retreating soldiers. Retreat and regroup. Major Bautista urgently ordered through the radio. With what was going on, they needed to stop these creatures even more. Dad, look, Colleen called out to her father, pointing somewhere. Major Bautista turned to his daughter and saw that she was pointing at where the explosions of the landmines occurred. The smoke and dust had not dissipated entirely, but it was now easier to see through it. Those that saw that were shocked. There was nothing there was but a headless rotting corpse of a cow, filled with holes, and its legs missing from the explosion. It was far different from what they saw before, with it being a fleshy creature. It also appeared that the body of the cow somehow blew up, seeing how ragged it was, having a large hole on it. It might have been the cause of the sudden spread of these things. Are those parasites? Alana, who was also present to participate, muttered. Being an otaku herself, she had seen such kinds of motifs for creatures and stuff. Parasites. How did you come to that conclusion? Major Bautista heard Alana's mutter and asked in dismay. I'm not really sure, but it's just how it looked like. When the previous host lost its legs, it's rendered unusable, so these parasites began to seek new hosts. That huge creature before might be a cluster of parasites and not just one creature. Alana explained, not mentioning her actual reason to deduce the situation. Who would accept that she speculated as such because of a zombie game? In any case, there was no doubt that Alana's deduction was the closest to the current situation. Major, what are we going to do next? A soldier called towards Major Bautista in desperation. They just saw their comrades die and turn into shambling worm-coiled monsters. It was not surprising that they were all desperate for many reasons. If it was the normal circumstances, just firing their guns would be plausible. But worm-like creatures of this size were hard to aim at a distance. However, getting up close was also not a good thing, considering how fast these worms move after closing in towards a potential host. It was a dilemma, but all they could do was face it. Finally, Major Bautista gave the order. Men, take aim and fire. Don't bother conserving bullets. If these things reach the settlement, we will be done for. And there, the sounds of gunshots finally ensued. The parasites became riddled with holes. But to everyone's surprise, none of them seemed to be dying at all. Even with their bodies damaged, some torn into two by the bullets. Both ends of the parasites would move towards the direction of their potential hosts.